Imagine a quiet morning on the Mediterranean. The year is 1967. The sun is high. A U.S. Navy ship glides through international waters, its American flag catching a light breeze off the Sinai coast. Then, the sky tears open. On June 8, 1967, in broad daylight in international waters, Israeli aircraft and torpedo boats attacked a United States Navy vessel for over an hour. When the smoke finally cleared, 34 Americans were dead and 171 wounded, a 69% casualty rate. The ship's hull bore more than 800 separate hits. Israel called it a tragic mistake. Survivors called it murder. And for more than 50 years, much of what happened that day has remained classified. This is the story of the USS Liberty. To understand why the Liberty was there, you have to understand the world it sailed into. By the spring of 1967, the Middle East was a powder keg. Palestinian guerrilla attacks had escalated against Israel from Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. Egyptian President Nasser had mobilized 100,000 troops to the Sinai, expelled UN peacekeepers, and closed the Straits of Tiran, a stranglehold on Israeli shipping. On May 30th, Jordan's King Hussein flew to Cairo and signed a mutual defense pact, placing Jordanian forces under Egyptian command. Israel was encircled. On June 5th, Israel acted first, launching preemptive airstrikes that destroyed 90% of Egypt's air force while it sat on the ground. Within 3 days, Israeli forces had seized the Gaza Strip and the entire Sinai Peninsula. Jordan, Syria, all of it was unraveling at extraordinary speed. The war that would reshape the Middle East forever was only days old. Washington needed eyes and ears near the front. And so, on June 2nd, the USS Liberty, hull designation AGTR-5, departed Rota, Spain, and headed east. She was a converted World War II vessel, crawling with antenna, built not to fight, but to listen. Her designation stood for General Technical Research, a cover name for an NSA signals intelligence platform. Her job was to intercept communications, locate transmitters, and send intelligence back to Washington. She was, in the bluntest terms, an enormous spy ship in a war zone. She was ordered to stay at least 12.5 miles from the Egyptian coast. She had 293 Americans aboard. What she did not have was an escort. On the morning of June 8th, as the six-day war raged just miles away, the Liberty sailed calmly off the northern Sinai coast near the town of El Arish. And she was being watched. At 6:05 in the morning, an Israeli reconnaissance aircraft passed over and reported the ship's hull markings, GTR-5, back to Israeli naval headquarters. Over the next several hours, Israeli planes circled the Liberty again and again, at intervals of roughly 30 minutes. One Nor-Atlas transport flew so low that crew member Larry Weaver waved to the co-pilot. The co-pilot waved back and smiled. Weaver later said he could see the man's rank clearly. The American flag was flying, the ship's name was on the hull. Israeli naval intelligence had already identified the Liberty as an American vessel earlier that same morning. By noon, after more than 6 hours of surveillance, they knew exactly what she was. And then, at 12:05 in the afternoon, 3 Israeli motor torpedo boats departed the port of Ashdod, 50 miles away. Israeli Air Force fighters, loaded with cannons, rockets, and napalm, were right behind them. At 3:05 in the afternoon, local military time, the calm shattered. Swept-wing Dassault Mirage 2 ICs dropped out of the sky with no warning and no markings. Lieutenant Painter on the Liberty's bridge later recalled that the aircraft had absolutely no markings. Their identity was unclear until it was too late. The Mirages raked the ship from bow to stern with armor-piercing rounds. A bomb detonated near the whaleboat. Men in the pilot house were thrown off their feet. Lieutenant Painter tried to reach 2 crewmen at the gun mounts. He never got through. He watched both of them, his words, blown apart. Petty Officer 3rd Class Pollard, standing right next to Painter, was hit. Commander William McGonigal grabbed the engine order annunciator and rang up full speed ahead. But there was nowhere to run. When the Mirages pulled away, Super Mystère fighters swept in. They brought 1,000-pound bombs and napalm. The bridge disappeared in an orange and black fireball. The Chief Petty Officer's Lounge became a makeshift hospital. Blood-soaked mattresses, shattered men. Crew member Larry Weaver, the same man who had waved at an Israeli pilot that morning, found himself hit by rocket and cannon fire. The blast blew him 4 feet into the air. He lost 2.5 feet of his colon. He was struck by over 100 pieces of shrapnel. Throughout the carnage, the Israelis were also jamming the Liberty's radio frequencies. Radio men James Hallman and Joseph Ward patched together broken antennae with whatever they had and managed to get a distress signal out to the 6th Fleet. Any station, this is Rockstar. We are under attack by unidentified jet aircraft and require immediate assistance. Overhead, unknown to anyone on the ship, unknown to the public for 35 years, a U.S. Navy EC-121 reconnaissance plane was circling. Chief Petty Officer Marvin Nowicki, a Hebrew linguist aboard the plane, heard his colleague shout over the intercom. "Hey Chief, I've got really odd activity on UHF. They mentioned an American flag. I don't know what's going on." Nowicki listened in. Israeli aircraft, he later said, were in the middle of completing an attack on a ship flying an American flag. At sea, 20 minutes after the jets first struck, 3 Israeli torpedo boats from MTB Division 914 closed in at high speed. They launched 5 torpedoes. One, fired from torpedo boat T-203, tore into the Liberty's starboard side and detonated between frames 53 and 66, blasting a teardrop-shaped hole 39 feet wide. 20 men were killed in that instant alone. The 6th Fleet had aircraft in the air heading for the Liberty, but they never arrived. President Johnson ordered the rescue aircraft recalled. Rear Admiral Lawrence Geiss, commanding the carrier force in the Mediterranean, protested to the Secretary of Defense. What came back stunned him. According to Geiss, President Johnson himself said he didn't care if the ship sank. He would not embarrass an ally. Geiss told that secret to one trusted officer and asked him to keep it until after Geiss died. He kept his word. When the last fighter finally departed, having emptied its entire weapons load, the Liberty sat listing in the water, her hull bearing 821 separate hits, her decks covered with the dead and dying. The Soviet Union sent a destroyer. It arrived 6 hours before the first American ship. An Israeli torpedo boat eventually came alongside the crippled Liberty. An officer called out over a bullhorn, "Do you need any help?" The wounded Commander McGonigal told his crew to respond. The response was not fit for broadcast. The Israeli boat turned and left. In the end, 34 Americans were dead. 171 were wounded. The ship was so badly damaged, she was later deemed prohibitively costly to repair. She was stricken from the Naval Vessel Register in 1970 and sold for scrap. Commander McGonigal was awarded the Medal of Honor in a quiet ceremony at the Washington Navy Yard, not at the White House. 11 Silver Stars were awarded, 19 Bronze Stars. The ship received the Presidential Unit Citation. Admiral John S. McCain Jr. wrote simply, "Heroism was the order of the day." Israel apologized immediately, calling the attack a case of mistaken identity, that they had confused the Liberty for an Egyptian vessel. The U.S. Secretary of Defense agreed it was unintentional. Within weeks, the Pentagon put out a report largely accepting that conclusion. But behind closed doors, a different story was emerging. The Navy's Court of Inquiry was held in closed sessions. survivors were issued gag orders. When one sailor told a superior he was struggling to live with the cover-up, he was told, "Forget about it. That's an order." The investigators, according to survivor James Ennis, asked nothing that might be embarrassing to Israel. Crucially, the court's two lead investigators, Rear Admiral Isaac Kidd and Captain Ward Boston, later said privately that they believed the attack was intentional. Boston didn't go public until 2002. His explanation for signing off on a report he didn't believe? Officers follow orders. The Navy's own legal officer, Captain Merlin Staring, disavowed the final report as flawed and contrary to the evidence. The Judge Advocate General prepared a separate summary, stamped top secret and locked away, that concluded the Liberty was easily identifiable as American, that her flag was flying in a moderate breeze, and that Israeli aircraft had made at least 8 reconnaissance passes at close range before opening fire. NSA Deputy Director Louis Tordella, in a private memo, documented hearing a suggestion from unnamed Washington officials that the Liberty should simply be sunk, to prevent journalists from photographing the damage and inflaming public opinion against Israel. He called the idea, in his words, impolite. Decades later, documents released through the Freedom of Information Act and materials from the Edward Snowden cache confirmed that the NSA was still actively classifying details about the incident as recently as 2006, nearly 40 years after the attack. Marvin Nowicki, the Hebrew linguist on the EC-121, who had heard the Israeli pilots reference the American flag, was visited by federal agents after writing a public letter about the attack. Israel never faced a formal public accountability process. The motor torpedo boat that fired the deadly torpedo, T-203, had its ship's wheel and bell placed on display at Israel's Naval Museum as an artifact of pride. In 1980, when senators were finally preparing to open congressional hearings, a diplomatic settlement was quietly brokered. Israel paid $6 million in damages. The State Department issued a press release. The book is now closed on the USS Liberty. It was the only attack on an American naval vessel in modern history never to receive a formal public congressional investigation. Was the attack a catastrophic error? The tragic result of bad intelligence, fog of war, and cascading failures? Or was it something more deliberate? An act carried out for reasons that powerful people on both sides of the Atlantic chose to bury? The official answer from both governments has always been a mistake. But the men who lived through it, who watched their shipmates burn, who were silenced and gag-ordered and told to forget, they never accepted that answer. And the classified files that might settle the question once and for all remain even now locked away. 34 Americans died on the USS Liberty. 171 more carried the wounds home. And the full truth of what happened on June 8, 1967, in international waters, in broad daylight, with the American flag flying, may never be fully known. Some chapters, it seems, are never really closed. If you want more turning points that shaped our world, the moments history tried to bury, subscribe to History by Marcus and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. And leave a comment below. Was the USS Liberty attack a tragic mistake or something more? Let's hear what you think.